And hi, welcome everyone to the Inclusion Starts Now podcast. Today I am so excited. I have been connected to Briana, who is in sex education. I guess I don't even really know what your title is or anything. So, can you please introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to have this conversation. And I'm here because my job is a title technically is community engagement and education manager for Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest. That means I get to talk about sexual health and do outreach with our community on reproductive and sexual health care. So, what does that sound like, look like, all of that, and connecting them to resources or to our health centers. Yeah, that's what I get to do. So, I do sex ed and talk about it, learn about it. Yeah, that's what I get to do.
That is so awesome. And did you like go to school for that? Like, how did you get into this?
I know no one, I have the joke, no one like in second grade is like, I'm going to be a sex educator, especially not me having gone to a conservative school. Um, no, it's definitely been a decision and intention of being here. Again, as I mentioned, came from an abstinence only background. And I think that having to learn things on my own and then being a teacher. So I did graduate and I was teaching high school again at a conservative school and just seeing how abstinence was missing my kids and feeling like what a disservice that was. And so I would look things up for them and try to help them and give them guidance and resources. And then that kind of became a theme and I love talking about this topic too. And then book club. I know I mentioned to you, I had a great book club and we would just talk about this stuff. And we all came from conservative backgrounds. And so it just became something that I would just dive into more and research. And then I read a book, Girls and Sex by Peggy Orenstein. And one of the last chapters, there is a teacher from California who's a sex educator. And I thought, you can do that? Like you can just be this? And that was it for me. So I do have other background and degrees and mastered, but the most important, I have my certification in sex education consultation. So yes, I am actually studying it.
That is awesome. And I think it's a very common occurrence that people in our generation did not get like I just don't think they were really exposed to sex education. I mean, I remember what I got in elementary school telling me about like, I'm gonna get pubic hair and BO. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, and one breast is gonna get bigger than the other. Like, and I seriously would like that was it. And I remember like 10 people asked the question of like, are you gonna be able to tell that one breast is bigger? Um, and I think, so that was like the start of it. And then, my parents were kind of just like, I don't think they had really good experiences the first time having sex. And so then it was just like, they didn't really know how to tell me about it. And so then I became an adult and got into teaching, and it was kind of the same thing of like, but I was focused on the disability world. Like I was, learning about how to be a teacher for kids with disabilities. And we had a guest speaker come in. His name is Maurice Belote. He's now retired, but he came in and he brought all of these sex education books for people with extensive support needs. And that just like blew my mind. And then I was teaching, and yeah, you're right. It was that things started happening in the classroom, especially, I was in a special ed classroom where like maybe a kid would start masturbating or something. And it was like, I don't want to just say no and like shame them because, they're like exploring their body, but it's also like we don't do that in a classroom. So it was just like all of those things kind of came together. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is such an important topic. And so many people are afraid to talk about it. Um, Especially with their kids. I mean, especially, when you have them as like a little baby and they're just this innocent little thing, and then they start growing up and you have to like just constantly be growing with them, it's hard. But so, and I actually wrote down that book, Girls and Sex. I don't think I've read that.
Yeah.
I have a
Um,
list.
it's I love that it came out. She's a journalist. She interviews 1,000 cis women across the United States. And then because of that book, she actually was asked to do a boys and sex in comparison. And that one came out more recently. And I read that one. Fantastic. Absolutely love
Wow.
that one too. So if you, yeah, it's so good. But again, this is like my field and expertise, but I will
Yeah.
say I'm biased. Being identifying as a cis woman, I didn't want to read a book about boys and sex because I was like, they've had their time. Um, and I read it though, and it's definitely for me because I do work with a lot of male identifying, and this book does cover trans men as well and their
Oh,
experience, and it's
I was
so
gonna ask
good.
if she touches on that.
So good. Yes.
Nice.
And interviews. And it just, I work with group homes, and, there's boys group homes that I work with and their staff. And I've handed it to them and I've gifted this book to them because I'm like, we need to talk about this more. So that's another
Yeah.
plug. I'm
Oh
a
my
big Peggy Orenstein fan.
I will put these all in the show notes too, so everyone can like go and reference them. And
Yeah.
I'll also add all the children books that I love
Yeah.
that talk about like consent and
Yep.
body parts, and yeah, there's so many great resources out there now. And I actually, so that's funny that you said that with that you being like a cisgender woman, not wanting to read the boys book. Because when I would start like dating people and it was getting more serious, and I was so clear with my male partner that I was like, if it's girls, I expect you to feel just as comfortable talking about periods and vulvas as I should feel comfortable talking about wet dreams and penises and all of it. Um,
Yep.
but
Yep.
that is also it, there's also like new information that I don't always know. Like it's hard to, yeah, because when I did not grow up with all the sex education, I also have to look into it now. Um, okay, so let's talk about sex education for people with disabilities. So, do you get to ever work in that kind of field, working with people with disabilities or families with children with disabilities?
I think the answer is we all interact at some capacity with individuals with disabilities. I think that's the baseline. So I don't actively work specifically in a classroom that's specifically for individuals with disabilities. I've not been asked to do that yet. And I think I emailed you the reason why. I think people think that it's like you can't, like we can't have this discussion. So I'm never invited in that space. But I will say I do know that when I come into any classroom, there's a really good chance that I am teaching with someone who's on a neurodivergent. And in fact, I know one of my schools, it's an arts academy. They say that majority of their students are neurodivergent. It's a neurodivergent school. So I do teach sex ed there. So I'll say that. Yeah, I guess I do, but it's not like specifically that. And so I do interact a lot of times with folks. And so a big thing about our curriculum that we use and what I teach my educators, because I have a team, is the big part is inclusive language. So we don't gender anything, especially like you might think we teach reproductive anatomy and physiology. That's usually the first one in our series, which a lot of people might gender. However, we stick to the science and anatomically correct terms. So I'm talking about the uterus and the ovaries and what the uterus can do, or what the penis and testicles do, what's their function, form, and just kind of stick to those terms. And it's not overt. Like I'm not actively like, it's just, it is what it is. So within a uterus owner, this is what's going to occur and this will happen, menstruation, etc. during puberty, Testosterone is more predominant in penis owners, and that's for the sperm production.
Yeah.
It's that kind of language, which I think, is more inclusive for folks because a lot of like gender dysphoria can occur or you're questioning. And so if I use a gendered term, I've already lost you because you don't
Yeah.
identify with that genitalia, perhaps. But I need you to care about your reproductive health and make sure that you're getting checks because of cancer, because of UTIs, because of STIs, you know. So I need you to know that these organs are still vital and we need
Yeah.
to take care of them. So I'm not willing, we just don't gender them. So that's another way. And also relationships, when we talk about we have a healthy relationships class, we say partners, you know, spouses, you know, we're not talking specifically boyfriend, girlfriend, that sort of thing, because there's a multitude of different kinds of relationships that a person can have. So just trying to bring in that inclusive language in this space. And it does take practice, I will say that. And I'm very intentional about it, and so is my team. But that's just it. Because I'm constantly doing it, it has become something that's very easy for me to use, and not specifically gender, use hey guys. That's a very common one. You know, it's hey all. How are you all doing today? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
It does take intentionality and time, but yeah, when you do it a lot, it becomes something that you don't think about anymore.
So I actually talk a lot about language, about trying not to be like ableist language. And when I use it, or when I talk about it with people, I talk a lot about having to do it at home, even when you're like not being listened to or watched, like even when you're with your inner circle, like you don't just take off your inclusion mask and then start saying things like, you know, whatever. You don't, you like the language that you want to be using in front of like the kids and people of like, living that inclusive life. You have to also use that at home. And me and my partner work really hard on like, when there is a problem and we're trying to figure out like, okay, how do we say this, but in an inclusive way? Like we will sit there and take our time with this conversation. But because of that, it makes it so much easier when we're like out talking with other people. We're using the language that we feel like is just the better language to use. And
Yeah.
there's also a great children's book, and I always call it The Wrong Thing. And I always want to say it's What Makes a Baby.
Oh,
Baby?
by Cory Silverberg.
Is it like it's a purple cover and
Yep,
it's
it is what makes a baby.
oh, okay, it is.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that book. That my kids love that book. It is such a great book, and it's such a great example of just like gender neutral, that some people have uteruses, some people don't. Some people have, sperms and eggs, and some people don't. And I just like love that they talk about making a baby, and they don't even talk about like they talk about the that you need an egg and you need a sperm, and they do a special dance together. And I mean, it was just I just seriously love that book so much.
And Cory Silverberg has kind of like a junior high one too called Sex is a Funny Word, which is one that I have. And it's, I would say, yeah, like junior high, high school, and it's comic book. It's a little thicker. It's great too. I love that one too. Very inclusive language as well. Fun, colorful. Yeah.
So that actually makes me think of something a question that I feel like a lot of people don't really understand. Because I will ask a lot of like, do you talk, like, do you have some sort of like sex education for your child? And I had people say no, and they're like, because they're too young. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, that's interesting because in my head, I have been teaching sex education to my kids since the day they were born. And they are now 3.5 and 2-ish.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, but it's not that I'm sitting there talking to them about all the different types of sex. Like I'm
Yes.
talking to them about like what their body parts are and like what consent is, and not just like sexual consent, like literally all consent. So I guess what is your opinion on like like some of these topics? Like when would you talk to kids about like some of those big topics of
Yeah.
like, especially in the disability world, I think we have a lot of
Mm,
like people like masturbating in class has been like
yes.
common in almost every classroom I've taught.
Yep.
Or like not being consensual, like with each other's body
Mhm.
parts. But then sometimes when they're like, well, I'm okay with it. And then I'm like, ooh, well, we still shouldn't be touching each other's penises. Like,
Yeah.
what's your suggestion?
Oh man, you touched on a lot of things. I
Good.
think
I tend to do this. I'm sorry.
that you're going to hear probably most sex educators, professionals in some capacity. I side very heavily. So if you go back, I think a lot of people like we think that we're teaching positions in like fifth grade, and it's like no, like I know that's not what we're doing, like right, like that's not it. But you put the word sex in front of education, and panic ensues. So then it's like I got to do a deep dive on your sexuality and like reflect on that for a second here. Like what were messages that you were getting? Um, because the honest truth is, yeah, I agree with you. Um, we're teaching body safety early on, and that's part of sex education. And so I used to teach kindergarten for a few years, and it's teaching about what are your likes and what are your dislikes. You're learning like what's your favorite color, what food do you like, what food do you not like, what friends do you want to play with, what friends do you not want to play with, what friends are you okay with, like you're teaching them all of these things, which are life skills. And part of that is also body autonomy. Like, hey, this shirt feels good on my body. It's not scratchy. Or I really love wearing this dress. It makes me feel really pretty. Or these shoes. Or I like running. And like you're teaching movement. I don't like running. I
Mhm.
had a kid who would negotiate with me before swim class, like they're learning. They know, like, this is it. They are who they are, and we are unfolding them. And they're learning how to advocate for themselves, in these small little ways. That's all part of sexual health education, because it's teaching until there's a book. I'm going to throw another book for you. I love it's called Don't Hug Doug. He
Oh, I
doesn't
love
like
that
it.
book.
Okay, so you know this one.
Yeah.
I would use that because, and then we would have conversations about, how many of you like a hug first thing in the morning? And a lot of them aren't morning kids. And you kind of can see it. Like we talk about it as adults, we're not morning people, or we're night owls. Kids are not morning people, or some are. And then I go, well, what about in the afternoon? Are you more likely to want to hug in the afternoon? Like even throughout the day, we may change our mind about what body interactions we want, high five, or in the morning, we love having our hair braided or petted or brushed because it's just a comforting thing. But in the afternoon, we're like, nah, leave it. It's a mess. Um, Kids are learning that, and we're giving them that language and talking about it. That's bodily autonomy. That's body safety. And you touched on something that one thing that I want to talk about a lot is in sexual health education, we want to use exact verbiage. We want to say what we mean. And coming back from our society where we use a lot of innuendos, we use a lot of anecdotes when it comes to sexual health or activity or etc. First, second, and third base. We use the birds and the bees, terms like wrap it up. When we're working with folks with disabilities, that language is really hard to decipher. Not only that, it's hard to decipher for like folks in general because first and second, third base means something different to all of us,
Mhm.
because we're not comfortable talking about it. So we've created all of these isms. And especially with kids, we call things wee wee and hoo ha and go make sure you're washing, the coochie, like, and we're like, what is that? And so for kids, it's really important that we say what we mean, especially with folks with disabilities, because it's extra hard to decipher. Well, what do you mean by that term? And
Yeah.
that break, so jumping through those abstract concepts is difficult. So for parents or caregivers or teachers, it can be really hard to call things what they are. Like, hey, we don't masturbate here in the classroom. Like, even saying the word masturbate
Yeah.
is really hard for a majority of the population. I say it very freely because I say it probably more commonly than I say apple juice, um, but we have to call it what it is and teach them where and how, and we're going to have to do it over and over again. This is something that is common. It happens. We're discovering and exploring our bodies, but where we do it, how we do it, is very specific.
Yeah.
And so that is something that I get messaged a lot by my friends with their kids, because they're constantly exploring their genitalia, and I'm like, yeah, great. But, teaching them where it's appropriate to do it and where it's not appropriate. And you might have to reiterate that several times because they're getting into new spaces, like, well, how about grandma's couch? How about in grandma's kitchen, or in my friend's house, in my friend's bathroom? Like, you're going to have to say it over and over again and teach those different spaces that are safe and private for them, and
Yeah.
call it what it is. Make sure you're washing your vulva. Make sure because it also gives it power, those body parts power. Because another thing I know is that disabled students are disproportionately, unfortunately, abused
Mhm.
because of their lack of understanding of these body parts and their bodily autonomy. And so when you have practiced with them, because that's just it, it's a practice. It has to be spoken out loud and rehearsed and role played. They have the knowledge and the power to inform whoever or talk about it. And that's empowering them.
Yeah.
And
It
that's
is.
uncomfortable for parents and folks.
Oh, totally. I mean, it wasn't until we had our first child that I was like, I think we need to start saying vulva because this is not a vagina. This is a vulva. And it did sound, and it wasn't like, in the house, it was like not as weird because we like
Mm-hmm.
talked about it and we were like, no, we're changing this. But then I'll talk to someone else and be like, I don't know, whenever vulvas come up, I'll like say vulva.
A lot
And
in my profession.
I mean, it probably comes up a lot if you're friends with me because
Yeah.
I do make this such a point of like, we have to talk about this. We have to like normalize
Mm-hmm.
talking about this
Mm-hmm.
because like, I mean, I know I personally got an STI because I don't think I had enough information
Mm-hmm.
about how to have safe sex, about like why it's important. And I mean,
Yeah.
just that like sex isn't just one thing. It is not
Yeah.
just vaginal intercourse. And I think that was something that I'm still trying to like relearn to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I teach my kids better safety when it comes to having partners in the future. Um, I'm kind of all over the place because I just feel like you've said so much that I want to talk about. Uh, but the masturbating in class and you were talking or masturbating in public,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about like a private, safe place. And that was actually the first step that I did, especially with when I was in a middle school. It was just like public place, private
Mm-hmm.
place. And
Mm-hmm.
we would talk about it. My bedroom is a private place where I can do this. Like my desk at school is not a private place, like it's a public place. And so it was like being very clear of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is where we do these. And then we talked about this, the barriers of like parents not feeling comfortable talking to their
Mm-hmm.
kids about this. I sent a letter home to all the parents being like, we are having this happen at school. I would really like to talk to our kids about this. Like, so I told them everything I was doing so then they could do it at home too. So the language was like following
Yeah.
the
Yep.
child so it would really get ingrained in there and like we all have needs, we all go through
Mm-hmm.
puberty, we all like we want to be in relationships. I mean, romantic or not,
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
we want that human connection, and it's just so important to talk about. So do you have any sort of resources or something to like maybe start that process of like just like kind of gaining those relationships?
I
Not to put you on the spot, like totally
No,
on the
I
spot.
am just running through all my thoughts there. Because yes, I've heard that scenario and situation happen all too often. And then we kind of just write it off as it is. And we don't actually try and like, well, hey, let's make sure that all parties involved are okay and also getting the education that they need. Um, to better understand because it can be really confusing if you're mixing the signals. So in my consent and boundaries class and in healthy relationships, we talk about communication skills. And this is what I mean by like, people don't realize this is sex ed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm talking about relationships, the relationship spectrum and consent and boundaries and how to establish them. Is when you're communicating with someone, what are all the different ways you can communicate with someone? There are so many. You can communicate on a post-it note, you communicate voice note, text, on Snapchat, you can communicate verbally in front of someone on FaceTime. There are so many different avenues to communicate, and some are better than others. And we all like to be communicated differently. So, you have the millennials that don't like phone calls. I'm not one of those. I love a good phone call, but
I'm not one of those either.
yeah.
Like, here, call
So
me.
am I a really cool youth? Maybe. No. I just like we don't even realize that as a basic skill. Communications is a skill. And we have to learn how we like to be communicated with. And then we've got to let people in our circle know that. So if you're someone who appreciates a to-do list or post-it notes, then you have to make sure the other person like knows that. So they're leaving you post-it notes. If you've got to share calendar invites with your partner to like remember things, then you've got to do that and communicate that, right? Shouting across from upstairs to downstairs or from another room is not great communication. Arguably, it is communication, not great, clear, effective communication. So again, having to learn that and learn, how does your child like to be communicated with? I know for my husband, I have to make sure he's in the room and has eye contact. Like he's not cooking, he's not putting his shoes on, because then he doesn't hear it. And then what inevitably happens?
Yeah.
We get in an argument later because I communicated to him, but
Yeah.
it wasn't how he needed to hear it or, how he likes to be communicated with. That's a conversation we have to have, especially with all parties involved. Any student, we can learn, how do you like to be communicated and talked to?
And
Once,
as not sorry to cut you off, but as an
uh,
educator, I feel like it's really important to also focus on like the nonverbal communication,
yes,
which is what I do a lot again, because my kids are very small. But even in the special ed classroom, I talked a lot of like, if someone's trying to hug or play with someone, I'm like, hey, look at their body language. Like, does that look like they want to play with you?
yes,
Like, and it was kind of like, again, that direct learning of walking them through this process. Like, there's
yeah,
a lot of that direct learning and then being the example so you can like show them
yeah.
like how to
Part
set
part
boundaries.
of
And yeah.
Exactly. Part of the one of the activities I do too is body language, where I bring two people up and I have them think of an emotion and a degree of that emotion. Is it mild, medium, or high? And then I have them, don't tell us what it is. And there's two of them. And I go, you can interact with each other or not. And so then I go 3, 2, 1, go. They pick a pose, whatever it is, anger, sadness, confusion, surprise, whatever. And then like the degree they're going to express it. Then I have them freeze. Then I go to the audience and I go, what do we think is happening here? No words, like we don't know. Let's decipher. And so all the different scenarios that people can think of, are they in a relationship? Are they not? Are they siblings? Is this parent and child? What's just happened? What do you think was just said? Uh,
Oh my gosh,
we
I love it
all
so
think
much.
of so many different things. And because of our own experiences and perspectives, some people are like, oh, it's a surprise birthday party. And someone's like, no, this is someone's just found out some terrible news, like
Yeah.
the spectrum. And I don't even let the two people up front share what their thing is at the end because it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
I don't necessarily ask them to share me what was your expression. Um, because I also talk about the power dynamic there. Also,
Yeah.
who do you think has more power in this situation?
Oh my
Why?
gosh.
Like we can go really deep and we have not shared a word. These people have not, the two up front have not said anything because body language is so powerful and it
Yeah.
says so much. So, individuals who struggle with seeing that or deciphering that, we have to be able to communicate in multiple ways, maybe repeatedly to ensure that understanding is happening in all parties. And so, yeah, I do talk about body language and practicing. Well, what does it look like for someone who's saying no, or is disagreeing, or is uncomfortable, or is unhappy, or is really excited, or happy and joyful? Because that's just as important. And that's part of the communication as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love all this so much. So can people like hire you as like to come in? Like, because if anyone's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, we need this like today, like can
Yeah.
people contact you or
So, I mean, I do work in the Riverside County area. So with Planned Parenthood, we
Southern
offer
Riverside,
yes,
Southern,
in
like
Southern
San Diego?
California. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my affiliate, we cover from San Diego County, Imperial County, and Riverside County. I am in charge of the Western Riverside portion. We offer our sexual health educational classes free for schools and nonprofits, and a nominal fee for other organizations. But yeah, we come in and we offer our classes. Me aside, I also do consultations. I have a couple of therapy friends who've had clients who were requesting sexual health education classes or things for their kids because of various things or reasons or interests. Their school wasn't covering it, etc. So I also do consultations as well in classes, workshops. Yeah, I do the gambit of things because honestly, there also, if you're interested in talking about sexual health or coming into this field, I'll encourage you highly. There's space for everyone. We need more voices in this space. We need more diversity in this space. Honestly, there's room for everyone, and the conversations are growing, but there's so much more growth that we need in this field in so many different facets. Um, to continue having these sexual health education conversations and advocating for our bodies and access to reproductive health care, et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera,
Oh my
et
gosh.
cetera.
We could, I could complain about
Yeah,
that forever. It's the whole healthcare system is really,
yeah,
it's really pissing me off is
yeah,
really
yeah,
what it is. Um, and the government. I don't know, the world. Who can I really blame here? Um, but thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that your contact information, so like if people want to reach out to
mm-hmm,
you, it's going to be down below.
mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for being here. And if anybody has any questions, you can leave comments wherever you're listening to this podcast or reach out to either of us. Everything will be
Yes,
below.
yeah.
Um, so thank you again so much for being here, Brie. Oh, I don't think I said your name the entire time.
Oh,
Did you introduce yourself?
I did
You
introduce. Yeah,
did. So you must have said your name.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And yes, I'm more than happy to be a resource for other teachers, start conversations. I've got gobs and gobs of websites and resources and everything. So happy to be a resource for folks. So please feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you.
well, everyone, inclusion starts with you, and I just want to help. So have a great day.